Vernon Presley kept the last gift his son ever gave him for the rest of his life. He never placed it in an interview, never offered it to the biographers who came asking. He just kept it, the way you keep something that says what the person who gave it could not say directly, the way you keep a thing that is, in the end, not really a thing at all. This is the story of that gift, of two men inside Graceland in the final years, father and son, alone together in the middle of the most famous life in America, and the love between them that was so large and so wordless it had to be carried across a room in the form of objects, because neither of them had been given the language to do it any other way. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley was 40 years old and disappearing, not dramatically, not all at once, the way a person disappears when the weight of everything they carry becomes more than the body was built to hold, slowly, room by room, night by night. The people who lived inside the gates watched it happen the way you watch weather change, gradually, unavoidably, in the specific quality of the light. Vernon Presley watched from 30 feet away. He lived on the property, in the house Elvis had built for him just inside the gates, close enough that a man with a bad heart and a father's attention could see the lights of the main house burning at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning. Vernon did not always know what his son was doing in those hours. He knew what the lights meant. They had been the last two since August of 1958, since the morning Gladys was buried, and the world around them contracted to just those two. The son who had come home too late, the father who had stood in a hospital corridor and watched helplessly. In 17 years, the absence had not diminished. It had simply settled differently, had become the weather of the life they shared, rather than an event inside it. Elvis had never recovered from losing his mother. Vernon knew this better than anyone. He was careful, in the way men of his generation were careful with such things, never to say it out loud. What the public knew of Vernon Presley was spare. A quiet man from Tupelo, a man who had once been arrested for altering a $4 check and served 8 months while Gladys struggled alone with an infant. A man who, at Elvis's insistence, had managed the day-to-day business of Graceland for years. Payroll, expenses, the financial plumbing of a life so vast it required a small office just to administer. What the public did not know was the specific texture of what they shared inside those gates. Vernon arrived at the main house most mornings with a small reason to be there. A bill requiring a signature, a call that needed returning, paperwork that could have been handled by phone but was instead brought in person. The staff understood what the visits were, a father counting his son's breaths from across a room. The particular vigilance of a man who has lost one person and has organized what remains of himself around not losing the other. Elvis received these visits differently than he received nearly everyone else. With others, even those he genuinely loved, there was always a slight management to his warmth, a calibration, a careful deployment of the version of himself the situation required. With Vernon, it fell away. Not entirely, not always, but enough to be visible to the people who watched him closely. He called him Daddy all his life, into his 40s, into the velvet and the jumpsuits and the 2 decades of accumulated mythology. Daddy, a Tupelo word, a child's word, the word of a boy who grew up on Old Saltillo Road before the world decided what he was. A word that existed before the fame and had nothing to do with it and could not be taken from him by it. Vernon called him son, without performance, without ceremony, the same 2 syllables he had used when the house was small and the life made more immediate sense. 2 men in a house too large for both of them, using the names they had always used. In January of 1975, Vernon Presley had a heart attack. He was 60 years old. The chronic conditions had been accumulating quietly for years. The slow arithmetic of a body that had worked hard and worried harder for 6 decades. But a heart attack is different from chronic. A heart attack is the kind of event that clarifies things whether or not a person is prepared to be clarified. Elvis received the news at Graceland. The men around him described his response with a careful consistency across their separate accounts. He went very still, not the theatrical stillness of a man managing his reaction for an audience. The complete, private stillness of someone who has just heard that the last person who knew him before any of this began may not come back. He drove to the hospital himself, did not send someone ahead, did not wait for the entourage to organize. He arrived before anyone had prepared the space for him, which was, for Elvis Presley by 1975, an extraordinary act of undirected impulse. He sat beside Vernon's bed for hours, not performing the vigil, just sitting, present, the way you sit with someone when you have just been forced to look directly at the possibility of their absence and found it too large to look away from. Vernon recovered. He came back to the property. He resumed the morning visits, but something had recalibrated inside both of them in a way the staff could feel without being able to name. Vernon watched his son now with a new quality of attention, the attention of a man who has been given a warning and has chosen carefully how to spend what remains. And Elvis received that attention the way he received most honest things by then. Warmly, incompletely, with the reflexive deflection of a man who has spent 20 years keeping the most real parts of himself just behind the surface of everything else. He accepted the watching. He could not meet it fully, but he let his father sit close. That, in its own language, was enough. Elvis gave things. This had never been a secret. He had been giving since before he had anything to give. Handing cash to strangers, paying off hospital bills for people he barely knew, buying cars on impulse and leaving the lot before anyone could thank him. The people who knew him well agreed it was not charity as public gesture. It was something more structural than that. He did not know how to say the things he felt. He had grown up inside an emotional grammar. Tupelo, the Assembly of God Church, the particular shorthand of Southern men of his generation, that did not easily accommodate the direct expression of what lived in the chest. You showed it. You provided. You placed something tangible in someone's hands and trusted that the weight of it would carry what words couldn't reach. With Vernon, this language had been running all their adult lives. The house, financial security constructed from nothing and defended with a ferocity that had no practical explanation except love. A car, a ring, small things brought across the property with no occasion attached, set on a table with a minimum of ceremony. Vernon received them all the same way. The quiet gratitude of a man who does not need the gesture explained because he already understands the grammar it is written in. He would say, "Thank you, son," nothing more, and Elvis would nod, and they would sit together with the television on. And the thing between them, the enormous, wordless, irreducible thing, would go on being what it was without either of them saying so. That was how they loved each other. Not because it was the only way men loved, but because it was the way they had learned in the particular school of who they were and where they came from. And some dialects, once learned, do not convert easily into any other tongue. By the summer of 1977, the machinery of Elvis's life had acquired a quality the people inside it had learned not to discuss directly. He was not well. He had not been well for a long time. The people managing him, his physician, his staff, the men whose loyalty had made them, in the end, incapable of full honesty about what they were witnessing, managed the situation with the careful silence of people who understand that naming a thing makes it real in a way that silence prevents. Vernon watched from across the property. He came every morning. He brought the paperwork. He sat in the chair that had become his chair, the one the staff had quietly stopped offering to anyone else. In late July, Elvis called Vernon into a room alone. What the staff could observe from outside was this: two men, a door pulled mostly closed, no raised voices, no audible distress, just a father and a son in the particular quiet of people for whom words have always arrived slightly smaller than the thing they are trying to say. When Vernon came out, he was carrying something. The accounts from those present are careful and incomplete. The way accounts are when people are remembering through grief and understand they do not fully own the story. What they agree on is the quality of how he held it, not casually, the way you hold something when you already understand what it means. He carried it back to his house. He placed it where he could see it. 3 weeks later, Elvis was gone. Vernon Presley outlived his son by 4 years. He died in June of 1979. In that time, he kept Graceland running, served as executor of the estate, administered the decisions required of the last surviving member of a family reduced. Before either of them was ready to one, he functioned, he managed, he attended to each day. But the people who knew him in those years described a man who had not found a way to set the grief down, not incapacitated, present, capable, attending to what the role demanded, but carrying something that did not lighten with time, the specific weight of a man who is still in some interior room of himself, waiting for a door to open that is not going to open. He kept the last gift exactly where he had put it. He did not move it. Some things you leave in the place where the person who gave them placed them, because the placement is part of the meaning. Because to move it is to accept a finality that the body has not yet caught up to. Here is what the gift was and was not. It was not large, not the kind of thing that earns a museum case or makes headlines. Elvis had given Vernon large things across the years: the house, the cars, the financial architecture of a stable life built on top of an unstable one. Those were the proofs available to a man who spoke in provision. They said, "I will take care of you. I will not let you end up where we started." The last gift was not that language. It was older, more private. The language of a son who is 42 years old and standing in a room with his father in the July heat, and who understands, not in words, not consciously, but in the body, in the quiet that descends on a person when time has begun to make itself felt, that the large things have already been said. What remained was something smaller, something chosen not for its size, but for what it carried, the kind of thing that says, "I have always known you were here. Whatever else this life became, however far it carried me from the house and the church and the name you gave me, I am still your son. I have always been your son." Vernon took it with both hands. He sat with Elvis a while longer. Then he went home. We remember Elvis in the grammar of spectacle, the voice, the stage, the name that carries still, after 50 years, the electricity of something that happened once and did not happen again. What is harder to hold are the private dimensions of that life. 2 men inside a gate. A father who came every morning with a practical reason and a real one underneath it. A son who gave things because giving was the only honest vocabulary he had ever fully been taught. A door mostly closed and something passing between them in a language that needed no translation, because it was the oldest language either of them spoke. It had been running between them since before Elvis Presley was a name the world knew, since the 2-room house in Tupelo where it all, quietly, began. Vernon kept it until he died. He never explained it. He didn't need to. The son trying to say something he didn't have the words for. A father who already knew. That is the whole story. And it is not a small one.